Great.
So it's nice meeting you, Sam. Start maybe just by telling me a bit about yourself, and we can take it from there.
Yeah. So I'm Sam Sweeny, located in the Boston area. I've been in sales and revenue operations for a little over a decade now. I spent the bulk of my career at a company called Apneta, where I started as an intern, truly bottom of the barrel, kind of worked my way, was lucky enough to catch on with what at the time was marketing operations, which handled all operations globally. And eventually when that team split into sales and marketing operations, I went with the sales team. So I was there for over 10 years until Apneta sold, at which point I found myself in the open market. That's when I was able to catch on with Wheel, and was with them for about a year until unfortunately they went through some layoffs. So a little over 12 years in the sort of sales and marketing and business and RevOps space, whatever it's going by at the time. It's changed since my starting point. And yeah, that's kind of has brought me here today. So I think I've worn a lot of hats over that 12 years. So I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you about kind of how the role has shifted in the past decade.
That sounds good. So maybe you can tell me a bit, how did you get into RevOps? Like, what was the journey that got you into the operational side of things?
Yeah, I mean, some of it was just need-based at the time. I mean, like I said, kind of, I was a little bit, I didn't exactly know what in the corporate sphere I wanted to do. And at the time, the Apneta needed some help on the marketing operational side. And when I kind of got to dip my toe in that sort of experience, I really fell in love with it, and decided that that's something I wanted to pursue moving forward. So I would say, like, I started doing small things like managing Google AdWords campaigns and manual data entry and some light data hygiene work, and sort of getting my feet wet. I think what appealed to me early on about it, and something that still appeals to me today, is the notion that when you're in these roles, you get such a insight into the breadth of the company. You end up just by necessity kind of learning the ins and outs of a ton of different parts of the company. So for me, as a person early in my career, it was really rewarding to get a chance to see so many different aspects. So you're seeing the sales funnel process, you're seeing the marketing funnel process, you're seeing them generate top of funnel leads and how those matriculate through the funnel. And you're seeing how product responds to the needs that are kind of, sales are presenting back to them, and all that kind of translated through data through the operational role. I just felt really, it's a really unique way to be a part of a business where you're really interacting with every stage of it, because all of it's crucial to generating revenue.
Okay, I think, two follow-up questions.
Yeah.
What you say. So I think the first one is how important it is for you to start in sales and then grow into an operational role.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly that is always going to color your lens in a particular way, right? I mean, you start with sales and you kind of end up with a sales focused lens when it comes to issues of operations. And I think it's always worth being cognizant of that, because you don't ever want to be too over reliant on it. I will say, coming from the team that's at the tip of the spear when it comes to selling, I think it does provide a ton of insight into how your product's being received, what it's like when you're having these conversations on the open market, necessary tweaks to the roadmap and stuff. All that kind of stuff is being generated from your frontline workers, your tip of the spear when it comes to selling. And so I think coming from a sales operations background specifically and moving into more general revenue operations, I think looking for ways to operationalize that data, the information that sales is receiving as they're having conversations, both good and bad conversations, has always been a priority in my career. So I think, I certainly think there's different ways to go about this role. I think the way that I was brought up in it, it's a very strong focus on looking at what the seller is going through and how to use that data to inform the rest of the organization, primarily, and then kind of using that data to reflect back on the sales process. How can we make their lives a little easier? So I'd say it's colored my lens in a very specific way, but I do think it's a very helpful way to look at an organization, a revenue generating organization, just from the from the standpoint of what are other people thinking about our product, solution, service when a salesperson's pitching it to them.
That sounds good. And the second one, and you also touched it a bit right now, is you said that the data side of things got your interest, and you even took some manual data hygiene work on you to try and get into RevOps. So I'm sure you understand that the importance of a clean CRM.
Oh, yes.
So I'm curious to know, what are the most urgent CRM challenges that you're facing all the time?
Yeah, I think this is an area where I've evolved in my career a little bit. I mean, for me, my whole background is data hygiene. Like it's just an issue that I've constantly been obsessed with over my career. It's how I got my start with manual data entry, but also looking at ways to like operationalize data quality, whether it's like going to the market and looking at third-party tools, or using like Salesforce, for instance, Salesforce automations to sort of, and validation rules to sort of gatekeep that as sales are interacting with it in real time. I do think where I've softened a little bit is that I always want to appreciate that there are people at the end of these processes. So like the search for great data can't impact an end user's ability to operate within the CRM, right? And so I think that's where I've become maybe slightly less of a zealot on like the end user really needs to be in control of all this. They need to be able to fill out these fields. And if they don't, that's when they get validation rules. That's when we get, pipeline review, and we put it in our data hygiene dashboards. And I think the way I've softened is like, there are so many really valuable third-party tools, and to the extent the organization is willing, going out in the marketplace and seeing what you can provide for a salesperson, that they don't have to, so they can spend less time on data entry and more time selling. Mm-hmm. I think that is an area where I've sort of grown, and I think there is a ton of value. And I know it's an upfront cost, but I do think it's more quickly realized in terms of value than I think many organizations are thinking. I think like the amount of data and having reliable data versus data aggregated from end users, I think is a hugely valuable step in both making the sales process more efficient and generating good data. So I think that's the biggest challenge is operationalizing the process of data hygiene without putting the burden solely on the end user to generate this data, seeing what's out there. So that's the biggest challenge to me right now is how do I work with the sales team to get a full data picture versus making it their problem and I'm just gatekeeping what they can and can't, put in Salesforce. So it's a tricky balance, but one I think is hugely important.
So what is your number one tip on how to govern CRM data?
Yeah, number one tip. I mean, I think it's about establishing with both executive management and the people on the ground, like what the most important at that time pieces of data are that we're either missing or are feeling like is incorrect. Maybe it's a couple, 3 or 4 pieces of data, and work to get those up to date either through a sales process or through a third-party tool before moving on, because I think it can be a bit daunting to look at a data hygiene picture from a 10,000 foot view and say we need better data hygiene writ large. It can be a bit paralyzing. You don't know how to come up with this data. You're installing too many processes and putting too much onus on the sales team, which I think actually hurts your data hygiene process because it drives down adoption. I think identifying a couple crucial pieces of data early on, solving them, and then kind of replicating that approach, taking it one bite at a time. And, you might find that there's a tool out there that can solve more problems than you were expecting, but really focusing in on few core pieces of data. And for that, you need to rely on sales leadership, sales management, executive leadership to kind of what are the hallmarks that we're looking for in this data that we can really update quickly today, versus just sort of complaining about the whole data hygiene picture.
Yeah, that sounds always you need to try and focus on to break down the problem and then focus right step at a time.
Yeah, and I think because data hygiene is such a broad term and people always want it to be better, it can sometimes escape organizations that we really need to tie this back to revenue and value. And there are certain fields in the data hygiene world that are going to be more value to a certain organization, or that we need in a certain to set up a certain process that is lacking. And so I think it's always helpful to look at through the lens of what are the key core fields we need for initiative X versus let's just get better data hygiene.
That's a great tip. So last question is, what are your objectives as RevOps? Because when you were in sales, you had quota and objectives were clear enough. When you're RevOps, objectives are less clear, but still exist. So what are the objectives that you are running?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in that it can be a little bit more vague when you're dealing in the RevOps role, and certainly communicating that value back out to the team is something that can always be difficult because a lot of them, they're only seeing you at one sliver of what you're doing. I do think, generally speaking, my objective is to be the connective tissue between an organization, and for people to be able to come to me and know I will have insight into other processes that maybe aren't in their wheelhouse, that affect them in some way. So maybe that's an ability to gather technical resources for them at the outset of a deal, and a RevOps person really should have insight into, well, that process might interact this other process that the person in sales might not have a full understanding of. So really it's about being kind of an organization-wide subject matter expert on process, right? That's my first goal. And for people to feel confident that when they come to me for a process, I will know the entire landscape of processes within that organization and make sure that a new initiative will fit smoothly within that. So I know that's another vague sort of accomplishment, but I want people to be confident that I will know the entire scope of operations. I think there are some easy wins though when it comes to revenue ops. Like, I think from a data hygiene perspective, there are some ways to make easy wins, and I think to communicate to sales, for example, it's building them dashboards and kind of teaching them to fish a little bit, building them dashboards where they can go in and add components and sort of almost become less reliant on you. And more comfortable finding data for themselves. I think it helps them because they can realize their time to value on whatever their data they're looking for quicker, and take some of the pressure off of a RevOps team to be constantly doing sort of menial tasks that the rest of the organization could do if you just took some time to test. So I think being a teacher is hugely important as well. And I think it empowers people to go, to take stuff off of revenue operations plate and kind of be a little bit more in ownership of their day-to-day within a CRM. So I think that's another way where I would kind of gauge value. And I think ultimately, there will always be initiatives that RevOps people will be judged on. It's a new sales process. It's a new, a new support process. And so making sure you're a good communicator on these processes, I think will also instill in people your value, because, you're just be a good shepherd of these projects through to the end. I think that's just going to convince people that you are the subject matter expert you purport yourself to be. So I think, unfortunately, there's not as, you don't have a quota. You don't have, if you have a project management tool, maybe there's like a task, you're reporting on the task completed over a certain period of time. I think ultimately with this role, there is sort of it's a feeling that the rest of the organization has. It's a comfort, it's a confidence in your role that will ultimately be the judge of your value.
Yes, it's leading by actions.
Totally. I totally agree.
Cool. So the very last question is, how do you drink your coffee?
By the gallon and black.
Cool. So it was a great talk, Sam.
Yeah,
Sure it will be very valuable for our audience.
I hope so.
At the time.